everybody. I'm very excited to have Sunny Hostin with us today. I'm sure you've seen her on CNN. She's an alum of the Supreme Court Justice. What are you?
Of the Department of Justice's U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. So federal prosecutor.
Very impressed with you. Very impressed with you. You know, there's so much going on now in cities, in Ferguson and Baltimore. It seems every day you pick up the paper. My loyalty changes every day. One day it's like, how could they do that to that child? And the next day is, why would they do that to a policeman? I can't even figure out where I stand anymore. Except it does seem to me that more and more black youths are dying. And I don't know, has something all of a sudden erupted?
I think you feel the way a lot of people are feeling. Is this an epidemic? Is this something that has always been happening, or is this something new? I think it's something that likely has always been happening. I think we haven't learned about it because we didn't have cell phone video, quite frankly. So I, as a prosecutor, certainly heard about police brutality. I certainly heard about a lot of crime in communities of color. But when you get to see it, and we know that cell phones are just ubiquitous, people whip out their cell phones all the time. I think that we are now seeing the reality of what is really going on in our country, and quite frankly has been going on for quite some time.
But it doesn't seem that the cell phone changes the indictments. Why is that?
That is true. That is true. I think that there is this crisis of confidence in our communities of color between people of color and the people that are policing them. And so there's this disconnect there, and there is now a disconnect between what happens when you have these altercations. Will someone be indicted? Will a police officer be indicted? In Baltimore, we saw 6 police officers indicted. Unfortunately, in other cases, I think what we saw in Ferguson was sort of a bastardization of our grand jury process. And I think something really has to change, but it is changing, because Baltimore learned lessons from Ferguson. Ferguson learned lessons from Sanford, Florida. And I think in the case of Cleveland and Tamir Rice, we are going to see lessons learned from Baltimore. So I think things are getting better.
Right. That sounds possible.
It's hopeful.
I get the feeling that there's not just anger on each side, but so much suspicion. So that if I'm afraid of you and you're afraid of me, one of us is going to take the first hit. Somebody's going to do something to keep away the fear of being harmed.
No question. And I was on the ground in Sanford, Florida. I was on the ground in Ferguson. I was on the ground in Baltimore. And when I go into these communities, what people are telling me is, we are tired of being policed so aggressively, and we fear for our lives. I mean, I think a lot of people saw that video where there was a family that was pulled over on their way to the hospital, and the police officer was asking the passenger for identification, and he smashed the window in front of children and tased this guy. So people are even afraid of getting out of their cars to confront police officers. And so I think, what you're talking about is that crisis of confidence. And police officers, let's be clear, because I don't want to police bash. People often accuse me of that. Police officers have a really dangerous job.
No, I'm saying,
and there are so many good ones. Yeah, there are so many good ones.
There's so much fear on both sides.
But we have to fix this somehow. And I think there are a lot of solutions that a lot of people don't talk about, like community policing. What happened to the cop where, when I grew up, you knew your neighborhood officer, right? You knew that person by name. They knew you. We need to, I think, go back to that kind of community policing.
And my father used to always say to us, the policeman is your friend.
Exactly.
If you see a policeman, run toward the policeman. Don't ever run away from a
policeman. And people don't feel like that, especially young African-American men. And we now know, let's face it, when you look at the stats, even just for this year, we have more police officer involved shootings in 2015 than we've had in the past 25 years. That says something.
But it also says something, I think, about fear.
Yes.
Because the policeman is afraid that the guy who puts his hand in his pocket or something is going to pull out a gun or a box cutter or whatever they're going to do.
And I think they need more training. Police officers need more training.
David says, unless the blue wall of silence is ever broken down, will things ever change?
Oh,
How can you change them?
Thank you, David, for that question. I think that's really important because, as I said before, there are really, really good cops out there. I know them. I worked with them as a prosecutor, but they don't want to turn in their own. The good cops need to turn in the bad cops. And to be clear, they know who the bad cops are because I get to speak to the cops. They don't want to come forward for fear of retribution because they need that person to protect them when they are out in the street, of course, patrolling. But the good cops need to start talking about the bad cops, and that blue wall of silence really, really needs to come down.
This is from John. In all the cases that have received a lot of publicity, Baltimore, Ferguson, each case is very racially charged. Why do you think in this day and age we still cannot productively have honest dialogues about race?
Thank you, John. You know, I spend a lot of my day talking about race issues, and I'm often called a race baiter and a racist for having the courage to talk about these really important issues. I think what's most needed right now is that people aren't fearful of talking about race, that people aren't fearful of talking about how they feel, about their fears. Racial fluency is really important, and you can't start calling people racist because they want to talk about race. I think what has happened in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in Sanford, is that we now know that race is still a really big issue. We're not post-racial because we have a black president. If anything, I think it's sort of uncovered the deep-seated issues that we have in our country. Yes, black men are being killed twice as often as white men are being killed by police. That is just the statistic, and we have to talk about it. Are these crimes racially charged? Yes, they are. We've got to talk about why they are racially charged. A lot of people will sort of tweet me and say, well, that's because black guys commit more crime. Really? I mean, you're telling me that a race, it's in your DNA somehow that you commit more crimes? That's ridiculous. The issue is very broad. It's socioeconomic. There's so many issues, but race is an issue.
It feels like there's an answer. I mean, I know I'm the world's optimist, but it feels like there's been so much bad going down that we're looking at it and saying, what went wrong here in Ferguson? What happened here? Baltimore, we had indictments.
Yes.
So maybe we are learning, coming from out of this pyre into some kind of light.
I think there's no question about it. I was lucky enough to get to know Trayvon Martin's parents and his brother extremely well. I actually had dinner with Sabrina Fulton just a couple weeks ago. And I think this movement, this sort of new civil rights movement, this Black Lives Matter movement started in Sanford, Florida, quite frankly. And what she explained to me is she feels that her son's death was not in vain because it started this conversation, and it started the movement. And there is a movement, and it's getting better. And I want to be really hopeful to people because I get to see it on the ground, and I have felt a difference. When I was in Ferguson and I saw Humvees or rather armored cars coming towards me. I was with Anderson Cooper. It was shocking to see this sort of police military, but I didn't see that in Baltimore. The mayor of Baltimore made it very clear to me that she learned a lesson from what happened in Ferguson, and she didn't want to over-militarize her police force. And so I think that we are seeing real change because of what's happening. It really is the new civil rights movement. I mean, I think Trayvon Martin's death is sort of like Rosa Parks sitting on the bus. I think we're seeing that change when it comes to policing.
A game changer.
It's a game changer, yeah.
Chris wants to know, do you think that there are more shootings now? I mean, I know you said that there's a lot of it has to do with the social media.
Yeah.
But do you think somehow something has been unleashed where kids, black kids, and cops are so fearful that they're getting a little trigger happy, that they're afraid that they'll be the next one to be pounced on? I mean,
That's a good question.
Does the cycle get hotter and hotter?
Right.
Until we
Well, thank you, Chris, for your question. To be sure, we don't know what the statistics are. So that's one problem, because while the FBI gets all these stats for police officer involved shootings, they are the police departments are voluntarily giving that information. So they're not required to give the information to the FBI. So we really don't know if there's this huge uptick in statistically in police shootings. I do think, though, that because we have the cell phone videos everywhere, that we are seeing what has been happening for a really long time in terms of policing African American and Latino communities. We do know that they are policed more aggressively. We do know that those communities have many more arrests for low-level crime. And we do know that police officers are more apt to shoot African American and Latino men rather than when there's a white perpetrator. So it's a big problem. It's been a problem. I think that there has been an uptick, but most importantly, I think, is that we're just more, we know more about it because of social media.
Joan wants to know, in your reporting, do you find the vast majority of victims that are killed by the police, that they were armed with weapons?
Oh, that's a good question, Joan. The problem with answering it is that we don't have real statistics. But if you look at sort of some of the studies that have been done, many of the African American young men that are shot by police did not have weapons, and that is extremely troubling. And you look.
But you can't even really say that.
And that's the thing. A lot of the stats
I think that's
it's
incendiary
anecdotal
thing to say too, because we don't know that. If we don't have the numbers, then we don't have the numbers.
Well, we don't have an accurate reflection of all the numbers, but we do have some numbers. And when you look at those numbers, yes, a lot of them, many of them, are unarmed. And so, some would argue maybe the numbers are even higher.
Right. Another question here from Brian. He says, I can't believe how many minors are killed by gunfire during a situation that might be one of domestic disturbance that becomes out of control. Can't the government help here?
I think the government is trying to help, right? I think the federal government is certainly trying to help, but the answer, I don't think, is with the federal government, quite frankly. I mean, we are seeing that the federal government is coming in, reviewing these police departments, and then suggesting reform. We just saw a huge one in Cleveland. I mean, the Cleveland Police Department is going to completely change. I suspect the Ferguson Police Department is going to completely change. I think
How will they change? What will they do?
Well, there are all these things that the Department of Justice will ask them to do. They'll make them get training. They'll make them perhaps have sensitivity training. They'll make them hire more officers of color. So there'll be many wear body cameras. That's been a huge movement that I'm fully in support of. So the Justice Department will make a lot of recommendations. And actually, they're not really recommendations, because when the Justice Department asks you to do it, they're really telling you to do it. Because if you don't do it, you're going to get sued by the Justice Department.
Can they tell the supervisors that they have to report?
They can tell.
That sounds like a biggie.
And they can tell the supervisors that they must report for whatever amount of time that they're being monitored. But I think in terms of John's, the other question involving children and domestic violence and disturbances, you need the beat cop to get involved in that. You need the local police department to get involved in that. And I think that's where the real progress will be seen. We want our police officers to care about the communities they police. In Ferguson, Marlo, when I was there speaking to police officers, they did not live in those communities, and they were afraid of the communities. We heard it from Darren Wilson. He said he was afraid of the people that lived in those communities. That is no way to police, and it's no way to go to work every day. Imagine going to work every day. I'm not afraid when I walk into CNN.
No, I grew up in a little town, and we knew the policeman by name.
Of course.
They knew us. And they said, you're the Thomas girls, you should be home, it's after dark.
I had the same situation. And so I'm hopeful. I'm very, very hopeful that we're going to see real change. I really am. I spoke to Sabrina Fulton just a few weeks ago, and her message is one of hope. Her message is one of faith. and belief in making our world better, and that her son's death would not have been in vain. I just think that is remarkably American, remarkably human.
Yeah. I wonder if some of those parents should go to speak at, you know, police conferences or something, you know, and have like a debate and a conversation. And, you know, my husband always said that that the reason you're not allowed to fraternize with the enemy in war is because once somebody shows you pictures of your children on the other side, it's hard to take a bayonet.
It's true.
But of course, that's not what we're dealing with here. But still, the idea to see the other person's face, and all of these cops are dads.
Of course.
And uncles and brothers.
And good people.
And
the majority are good
they
people.
Are. And I think maybe that might open up hearts. And for the police to also go and speak in these communities where there's so much fear and say, hey, look, we want to be a haven for you. We want to be the guys and the women who you run to, who you're not afraid of. You won't think we want to hurt you. I mean, it seems that we need a little dialogue, not just between the biggies, but between the people in the community and their community police officers.
I think we're seeing that.
Yeah.
I know Sabrina Fulton does that in her work.
Good.
I know that Michael Brown's parents have discussed doing more of that kind of work. And the officers that I've spoken to, especially Police Commissioner Batts in Baltimore, is making every effort to try to bridge the terrible gap that exists now. I don't remember seeing anything like this. And it's terrible. I mean, I have a 12-year-old boy who's about 5'9". He's huge. And I hate that I have to feel that perhaps he can't trust the police. I don't think anyone wants to feel that way.
Sure you don't.
But again, I think things are getting better.
That's good.
I do.
That's good. Well, thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you for your wisdom and for your optimism.
It's my pleasure.
And your
I am
experience.
optimistic.
I know you are. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.